I don't know about you, but I'm really nostalgic for the look and simplicity of the classic Windows XP UI. It's actually the operating system I grew up on, and since I'm a game development student that currently has an entire semester to work on a game of my choosing, I obviously opted to recreate that kind of interface for my game. I'm keeping this devlog brief, so I won't go too deep into the actual game, but for context, imagine a mix of papers please and keep talking and nobody explodes, except you're not checking passports or defusing bombs. Instead, you're controlling a smart home, and your job is to keep the family living there happy so they don't realize that you're not actually a fancy AI, but just some dude watching and controlling their home through a computer screen. For this project, the interface is obviously key, and it all starts with the windows. I started out simple, just creating some gray windows with a basic title bar that you can drag and move around, and that was the easy part. What was a bit harder was adding the ability to resize the windows, just like you would in, well, Windows. To make this work, I placed a bunch of rectangles along the edges of the window and created a script for these to define what type of edge they are, as well as fire an event whenever they are dragged. This event call is then received by the Windows Central Resize Manager, which handles the actual scaling. While it was added, I also added functionality to set a maximum and minimum window size, so players can't accidentally break the window by making it negatively wide. Since you can obviously have more than one window open, I also needed a way to manage focus. I set it up so the most recently clicked window automatically sorts to the top layer, and also added a gray overlay for the windows that aren't currently active, so it's easy to tell which one is selected. Though I will definitely have to replace this with a more subtle effect in the future. Oh, and I added a classic red X button to close the window, along with a little placeholder animation that came out way better than I expected. Now I had mostly functional windows, with nothing to put inside them. Since most of the interactions are going to take place through the security cameras in the house, making these was my first priority. To make this work, I used a render texture. As the name says, this is basically just a texture that you can store a rendered image in. So in the camera, you just select it as a target, and now the image the camera produces is easily accessible. Oh, and just a note, this house is something free I downloaded from the asset store because at some point I got really fed up with staring at gray cubes. So now I could just display the render texture inside the window and voila. Oh. Yeah, since the render texture has a fixed aspect ratio, it stretches whenever the window doesn't match it. My first idea was to stretch the image horizontally and then cut off the excess using a rect mask, but it turns out that the raw image component, which you need to display a render texture, doesn't actually support masking. Thanks, Unity. So instead I had to create a new script to fix this. It may look much simpler than the resizing script, but getting it to correctly handle the cropping by constantly recalculating the UV mapping took me like 3 times as long, though I did manage to get it into a working functional state. Now that I had the camera set up, I also wanted the player to be able to interact with them, or rather through them. Ironically, this turned out to be a lot easier than I expected. Essentially, I just take the normalized position from where on the window the player clicked, so 0, 0 for top left, 1, 1 for bottom right, and so on, and then do a raycast from the camera using that normalized angle. And as you can see, it works great. Whatever I click on in the camera view gets hit by a raycast in the exact same spot. At least as long as the window is in the same aspect ratio as the render texture. Yeah. That cropping fix I made is also messing up the raycast math. I'm gonna have to find a better solution for handling this in my game. And feel free to leave any suggestions on how I can solve this. But since I'm still just prototyping, I'm gonna stick with this for now and just not scale the windows when testing interactions. Good thing I did all that work to implement the scaling, right? Rounding out this first part of the devlog, I created a security camera manager that lets you switch between the different cameras, ensuring only one is ever active at a time. And more importantly, I added an interface class to make objects interactable. As you can see with this microwave, when you hover over it, you get a nice little highlight, and when you click on it, nothing happens. Yet. Which brings us to the question, what's next? Well, apart from really fixing the texture scaling this time, I'm also going to start working on the first actual interactive smart device. For these ones, I already have a bunch of ideas, from simple ones like a toaster to more complex ones like a vacuum robot that you can drive throughout the house. I also want to try letting the player rotate and zoom the cameras, as well as add an actual taskbar so you can minimize windows instead of just closing them, but these are lower on my priority list. What's high on my list though is thanking you for watching this little devlog. Please let me know if you have any suggestions, ideas or feedback, as I would love to have some input on this project. Oh, and if you want to follow or maybe even help shape the development of the project, subscribe so you can see more little devlogs like this, or get notified when I start doing playtests. Enjoy the rest of your day.